A man in his 80s woke up in a hospital bed in the Philippines with part of one leg gone. His daughter is one of the most photographed women on the planet. By his own account, nobody came and the phone never rang. What did arrive, eventually, was a letter. And here is the detail I cannot get out of my head, the one that made me want to sit down and go through this whole thing properly instead of skimming it like every other royal story that comes through the feed. According to the account Thomas Markle has given publicly, the letter did not arrive first. The reporter did. A journalist was already stationed outside that hospital before anything came from his daughter. Days later, a note. Now sit with the order of those events for a second, because the order is the whole thing. I want to be careful here, and I want you to hold me to it. Everything I tell you tonight comes from what has actually been reported and what the people involved have actually said, and where something is one man's version rather than established fact. I will tell you it is one man's version. There is enough in the confirmed record, there always was. But before we start, I want to put one small thing in your hand and ask you to carry it all the way to the end with me. A phone number. One phone number, which according to Thomas Markle's son, has not changed in 15 years. Same digits, same line, sitting unchanged in a contacts list through a wedding, a memoir, a streaming deal, grandchildren he has never met, multiple heart attacks, a stroke, and an amputation. By the end of this, I am going to show you why that unchanged number is this entire story compressed into a single line of text. And I am going to tell you something that I suspect will annoy roughly half the people watching, which is that the silence everybody screams about is not the damning part of this story. The silence is defensible. I will defend it myself in a few minutes, and I will mean it. The damning part is something else entirely, and it is sitting in plain sight, and almost nobody names it correctly. Stay with me. Let us start with who Thomas Markle actually is, because I think the fairy tale version of the Meghan Markle origin story has quietly erased him almost completely. And you cannot understand the fracture until you understand what there was to fracture. He is a lighting director, American television, decades of it. He won 2 Emmy Awards doing it. Say that back to yourself slowly, because it has a texture that the tabloid version sands right off. This is not a man who wandered into the frame when his daughter got famous. This is a professional who spent his working life in the industry she would later enter, on the technical side of it, in the part of the building where nobody photographs you. Lighting directors are the people who decide how a face reads on camera. They are the reason an actress looks luminous in one scene and flat in the next. He spent a career making other people look good under hot lamps and then vanished entirely from his own daughter's public story. And it goes further than trivia, because by multiple accounts, he paid for the schooling, private school, acting classes, the auditions, all the small, expensive, unglamorous scaffolding that turns a kid with a look and a bit of nerve into someone who eventually gets a callback. His family has made a blunt version of this argument publicly, and I want to put it in front of you in its harshest form rather than soften it, because you should be allowed to judge it yourself. The argument from her half-brother is that without their father's money and their father's belief, she would still be waiting tables. Not a career, not a title, not a global platform. A shift and an apron. Is that a fair thing to say about a woman's own effort and talent? Honestly, no, not entirely. Plenty of people get private school and acting classes and never get past the second audition, and the discipline it takes to grind through that industry belongs to the person doing the grinding, not the person paying the invoice. That version of the argument is doing something ugly. It is trying to hand the whole achievement to the father and leave the daughter with nothing. But here is the more careful version, and the careful version is harder to wave away. Nobody in that family disputes that he was there at the beginning. Not her, not in her earlier interviews, back when she spoke about him warmly and publicly and often. He was present, he was paying, he was involved. Whatever happened later, that part is not contested by anyone with a name in this story. He has also described the beginning of all of it in a way that stayed with me. He has said she was born by cesarean, and that because of that, he was the first person to hold her. Her hand closed around his finger. He says he fell in love with her right there in that room and stayed that way for 40 years. You can find that sentimental. You can find it self-serving. He is, after all, saying it to a camera. But you cannot find it uncommon, because it is roughly what every father on earth says about the first 30 seconds. And that is exactly why it lands the way it does when you set it beside where things ended up. Hold that image, first to hold her, then hold the hospital in the Philippines, because the distance between those two rooms is the story, and we are about to walk it. The public fracture starts in the week of the wedding, and I want to slow this section down considerably, because the way it usually gets retold flattens something genuinely complicated into something much simpler and much nastier than what probably actually happened. Days before the ceremony, Thomas Markle had a heart attack. He was hospitalized. He was too unwell to travel, too unwell to stand for hours in a chapel, too unwell to walk his daughter down the aisle as had been planned. The wedding went ahead exactly as scheduled. Charles stepped in and walked her down the aisle instead. And according to Thomas Markle's own account, the last real conversation he ever had with his daughter happened over the phone from that hospital, and it ended badly. What followed was 7 years of near total silence, broken only in fragments. Now, here is where I am going to defend a decision that gets used as a weapon against her constantly, and I want you to notice me doing it, because I am going to be much harder on her later, and I would like you to know I am not just running a hit piece with extra syllables. A father having a heart attack days before a wedding is a medical emergency. It is not a convenient excuse. It is not a scheduling problem. It is not a story he cooked up to embarrass anybody. Hearts do what they do on their own timetable. And the decision to go ahead with the ceremony anyway is not on its own evidence of a cold heart. You have to understand what a royal wedding actually is as a machine. Heads of state on the guest list, security arrangements locked in months ahead of time, and every layer of machinery that has to be built underneath a guest list like that. This is not a dinner reservation you push by a week because someone is unwell. There is a completely reasonable version of that week in which postponement was simply not available to her as an option, no matter what she personally wanted in that moment. So, no, I do not think going ahead with the wedding was the crime, and I think people who lead with that are picking the weakest possible charge. The problem is not the ceremony. The problem is everything that happened in the 7 years after it, and that is where this story stops being a bad week and starts being a pattern. Because a difficult moment is a difficult moment. Everyone has one. What turns a difficult moment into something else is what you do when the emergency has passed and the emotions have cooled and the phone is still sitting there. And that brings me to the part of this I actually think nobody covers properly. Before we go any further into the 7 years, I have to put something on the table that a lot of channels covering this story quietly leave in a drawer, because it makes the sympathetic version harder to sell. Thomas Markle is not a passive victim in this. Not entirely. Not even close. In the run-up to that wedding, he posed for staged paparazzi photographs, not candid shots taken from a bush by a long lens. Staged. Set up. A man being photographed reading about Britain in a cafe, being photographed getting measured for a suit, performing the role of the proud father for a camera that had been arranged to be there. He has given interviews, repeatedly, over years. He has spoken to tabloid newspapers about his daughter, about her husband, about her character, about her marriage. He has described Harry in one widely circulated comment in genuinely harsh terms. He has described his own daughter as a woman who takes charge of every situation she walks into, which is the kind of line that sounds neutral until you hear the tone it is usually delivered in. And Meghan's side has previously suggested plainly that the relationship broke down in part precisely because of those media interactions. I think that is true. I think that is a real and legitimate part of this story, and I do not think you can tell it honestly and leave it out just because it complicates the shape you wanted. Put yourself in the position for a second. Genuinely do this, because it changes how the rest of this lands. You are about to marry into an institution that lives permanently surrounded by the press, where intrusion is not an occasional irritation but the weather. And in the weeks before your wedding, your own father is discovered to have arranged photographs with that same press. Not ambushed, arranged. If that happened to you, would you pick up the phone quickly afterward, or would you go quiet and stay quiet, and would that silence feel, from the inside, like the only safe thing you had left? I think a lot of people watching would go quiet. I think I might go quiet. So let us be extremely clear about what I am and am not saying tonight, because I do not want to be misrepresented in the comments by people who stop listening at the 11-minute mark. Estrangement is not automatically a moral failure. People walk away from parents for real reasons, sometimes excellent reasons. The person who chooses distance does not owe the general public a signed and notarized explanation for why, and a father who talks to newspapers about his daughter has handed her a reason that a great many people would consider sufficient on its own. That is the honest Steelman. That is the strongest version of her case, and I have just made it for her, at length, without being asked. Now let me take the phone number out of my pocket, because this is where the whole thing turns. The claim from her half-brother is specific and it is checkable in principle, and nobody has publicly contradicted it. That number has not changed in 15 years, not since before the acting career took off. Not since before the wedding, not since before any of it. Which means something very particular, something that changes the moral shape of this entire situation, and that I genuinely think most coverage misses because it is too busy shouting, "The line was never cut." Think about what an estrangement usually looks like structurally. Somebody blocks somebody, a number gets changed, an address goes unshared. A wall goes up, and the wall is doing real work, because the wall means that even if one party wanted to reach across, they physically could not. The wall is a decision, and once it is built, nobody has to make the decision again. It makes itself every day, automatically. That is not what happened here. Here the line stayed open, on his side deliberately for 15 years. Same number, kept live, kept payable, sitting there like a lamp left on in a window. And I want to reach into a completely different world for a second to explain why that distinction matters so enormously, because I think it is the single most useful frame anyone can bring to this story, and I have not seen anyone use it. In diplomacy, there is a thing called a back channel. Two governments that are publicly at each other's throats, refusing to meet, denouncing each other from podiums, will very often keep one quiet line open, a trusted intermediary, a number that gets answered. And the entire discipline of statecraft treats that open channel as sacred because everybody who has ever done the job understands the same thing. The moment the channel closes, the situation stops being a dispute and becomes something else, something with no exit. The channel is what separates a conflict from a catastrophe. Now here is the part that makes this useful rather than clever. In diplomacy, there is an enormous and well-understood difference between a severed line and an open line that simply does not get answered. A severed line is a policy. It is cold and it is final, but it is at least honest, and both sides know exactly where they stand. An unanswered open line is something much stranger. It is a decision that has to be made again every single day. Every morning it exists. Every evening it exists. It never becomes automatic because it never becomes a wall. It is renewed silently by somebody over and over and over for years. That is what 15 unchanged digits actually represent. Not a wall, a ringing phone that nobody picks up, renewed daily, for longer than either of her children has been alive. And I want you to hold that image alongside the other one, because the two of them together are the emotional core of this whole thing. First person to hold her, hand closed around his finger. A number that never changed. A hospital in the Philippines with a reporter outside it. Her half-brother's version of the appeal is blunt, and I am going to give it to you in his own shape rather than dress it up. 7 years. You have had the number the entire time. It has not changed in 15. You have not called. You have not texted, not once, across health emergencies that would have brought most families back into a room together whether they liked each other or not. Stop sending officials into a hospital in the Philippines, he says. Pick up the phone, have a conversation. That is a real argument, and I do not think you get to dismiss it by pointing at the paparazzi photographs from years earlier, because the paparazzi photographs explain a year of silence. They do a much worse job of explaining a decade. But there is a second detail here, and it is the one that quietly demolishes the most common defense of the whole situation, and we need to talk about it now. The most common assumption when an estranged relative of a wealthy person goes to the press is money. It is the reflex. It is the first thing that gets said in every comment section under every one of these stories. He is doing this for a payday. He is applying pressure. This is a negotiation conducted in public, and the goal at the end of it is a check or a settlement or a reconciliation on terms that come with an allowance attached. That assumption is usually right, honestly. That is why it is a reflex. In most public family estrangements involving serious money, follow the money and you will find the motive standing there waiting for you with its coat on. Here, it is not right. Thomas Markle's public position across years of interviews and statements has been specific, consistent, and repeated. He does not want money. He does not need money. He lives simply. He has never asked his daughter for financial support from a woman who by any measure could provide it without noticing the difference. And here is why that matters so much more than it sounds like it should. That particular claim is unusually easy to check because it is a claim you verify by absence. There is no lawsuit, there is no public demand for a settlement, there is no legal filing, no leaked demand letter, no representative briefing that a figure was requested and refused. In a story where roughly every other detail has been fought over, disputed, litigated, and briefed against, that specific space is empty. So take the money motive off the table, because the evidence for it does not exist. Which leaves you with a genuinely uncomfortable question. If he is not doing it for a payout, what is he doing it for? By his own account, the ask is embarrassingly small. It is not a title, it is not access, it is not a seat at anything. It is a phone call, and the chance to meet his grandchildren before the arithmetic of being in your 80s makes that impossible. He has never met them. He has said that publicly and repeatedly. 2 children exist who carry half of his genetics, and he has never been in a room with either of them. And he is running out of runway, multiple heart attacks, a stroke that affected his speech, which for a man who has spent the last several years trying to explain himself to cameras carries its own particular cruelty. And now part of a leg gone in a hospital ward on the other side of the world. Here's the thought experiment I want to leave with you before we move on, and I want you to actually do it rather than skip past it. Imagine you are furious with a parent, legitimately furious, with reasons you could list, reasons a jury would nod along to. Now imagine they are 80-something, they have had a stroke, and you are told they have just lost part of a leg in a foreign hospital. Does the fury survive that phone call? For a lot of people, honestly, yes, it does. That is allowed. That is the part I said I would defend, and I am still defending it. But this is where the story stops being about a family and starts being about something considerably bigger, because Thomas Markle is not the only older man in this story who gave something significant and got silence back. There is a second one, and once you line the two of them up beside each other, the picture changes shape completely. The second man is Charles. And I want to lay out precisely what Charles did in order, because it has been buried under about 6 years of noise, and people have genuinely forgotten the sequence. He opened the doors of the institution to her. An American actress walked into that family and was brought in rather than held at the gate. That was not automatic. That was a choice, made at the top. And it could have gone the other way. He granted her a title. And then, in the specific week we have already discussed, when her own father was in a hospital bed and could not stand up, Charles walked her down the aisle himself, in front of the world, on the day. At short notice, that is not a small favor. That is the head of a family stepping into a gap left by another family's crisis, in the most photographed moment of that woman's life, so that she would not have to walk it alone. Years later, Charles was diagnosed with cancer and began treatment. Harry traveled to the United Kingdom and made a brief visit, then returned to the United States relatively quickly. Meghan, by the reporting, did not travel for that particular visit at all. Now, I want to be fair to Harry here specifically, and I want to be fair in a way that most commentary on this refuses to be. because I think the sloppy version of this comparison is unjust to him, and I am not interested in being unjust to anybody tonight. Harry has actually tried. By multiple recent accounts, he has made real efforts toward his father. Brief visits, reported meetings, some attempt at maintaining a line despite years of open public conflict and institutional distance, and a genuinely enormous amount of accumulated damage on both sides. Imperfect, inconsistent, occasionally clumsy, yes, but not nothing, not sustained total silence. That is a meaningfully different posture, and anyone who lumps him in with a decade of not answering a phone is not paying attention. So the criticism in this comparison is not that Harry has abandoned his father. The criticism is narrower and more specific than that. It is about her apparent absence from those particular moments, and about what that absence might suggest regarding who gets shown up for, on which side of the family, when things get medically serious. And now let me build you the thing I actually came here to build, because I have not seen anyone lay it out this way, and I think once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. I want to open two ledgers side by side. Two older men, 2 columns each. What went out and what came back. Ledger 1. Thomas Markle. What went out? Private school fees, acting classes, auditions plural over years, presence at the start of a career, acknowledged by both of them at the time. A phone line kept open and unchanged for 15 years. Public statements repeated that he wants no money. What came back? According to his account and his son's no call, no text, across a heart attack, a stroke, and an amputation. A letter which arrived after a reporter had already taken up position outside the hospital. He has never met his grandchildren. Ledger 2. Charles. What went out? Entry to the institution. A title. Walking her down the aisle in her father's place, on the day, in front of the world. What came back? During cancer treatment, a brief visit from his son. And by the reporting, no travel from her at all. 2 men. Both of them gave something significant at the exact moment it mattered most. Both of them later faced a serious medical situation. In neither case did sustained physical presence flow back the other way. Now, I want to be careful about what a pattern of 2 actually proves, because 2 is not a landslide and I refuse to pretend it is. 2 data points is a shape, not a law. There may be context in either column that would completely reframe it if we had it. But it is a symmetry, and the symmetry is uncomfortable, and it deserves to be named out loud rather than politely stepped around. Because here is what makes it bite. This is a woman whose entire public presentation, the brand, the speeches, the projects, the tone of the whole enterprise is built substantially on compassion, on connection, on showing up for people, on healing. That is not me characterizing it unkindly. That is the stated theme of the work. And her own brother's sharpest line is not about money or titles at all. It is that a show about compassion has not produced any compassion for him, or for his family, or for the institution his sister married into. Whatever you think of the man saying it, that is a genuinely difficult sentence to answer. Critics have made exactly that argument, and I think it is the strongest version available to them. If your public identity is built on showing up for people in their hardest moments, the people closest to you in their hardest moments become, fairly or not, the test case. Right, brace yourself, because we are about to get to the part where I think the contradiction stops being arguable and starts being structural. The privacy question. When Thomas Markle spoke publicly about a private letter his daughter had sent him, Harry and Meghan responded by describing it as a profound invasion of privacy. They pursued legal action against a newspaper that published portions of it. Privacy, in the framing at the time, was described in close to sacred terms. The one thing worth fighting for, the line that must not be crossed. The reason for the distance from the press, the reason for the move abroad, the reason for a great deal of what followed. I need to add a detail here for full context, and it is a detail that cuts against the simple version of that story. Reporting has suggested that Meghan's own representatives were the ones who first shared information about that letter with the magazine through mutual friends. before Thomas Markle ever responded publicly about it himself. If that account is accurate, and I want to flag clearly that it is reporting rather than a matter of settled record, then the shape of the whole episode changes. It stops being a story about a private document torn out of a woman's hands by a hostile father and becomes something considerably messier. It becomes a story where both sides, at different moments, for different reasons, chose to engage the press about the same piece of paper, which is a much more human story, honestly, and a much less flattering one for everybody in it. But that is not the contradiction. The contradiction comes next. This is a couple that fought a very public legal battle over press intrusion into their private life. And in the years since, the same couple has signed a significant deal with Netflix, published a best-selling memoir containing extensive private family detail, including material about relatives who did not consent to appear in it, and featured their own children in produced lifestyle content made for public consumption. Say that sequence out loud in order and listen to how it sounds. Sue over the publication of private family material, then publish private family material, then film the children. The tension there is real, and I am not going to pretend it away, because pretending it away is what the friendly coverage does, and it is why nobody believes the friendly coverage. Privacy as an absolute untouchable principle does not sit comfortably beside a business model that depends substantially on the sale of curated private moments. Now let me immediately complicate my own argument, because I promised you fairness, and this is where fairness costs me something rhetorically. That tension is not unique to them, not remotely. Memoirs, documentary series, curated social media, personal essays about the hardest thing that ever happened to you. These are standard tools of modern public life. They are used constantly by people who also genuinely and sincerely hold real boundaries around parts of their private lives that they never sell. Almost every famous person alive is running some version of this contradiction, deciding case by case what goes in the shop window and what stays in the back room. Singling out one couple as uniquely hypocritical about it means ignoring an entire culture that works this way. So, no, the existence of the tension is not proof of unique bad faith. I do not accept that argument, and you should be suspicious of anyone selling it to you. What is distinctive here is scale, on both sides of the equation. Most public figures managing this tension do not take a newspaper to court over it. And most public figures who do take a newspaper to court over private family material do not then, within a handful of years, produce a memoir, a streaming series, and filmed content featuring their own children. It is the size of the legal action set directly against the size of the subsequent disclosure that makes this one sharper than the ordinary version. That is a considerably narrower criticism than the one you usually hear shouted, and I think it is the only version of it that actually survives contact with an honest opponent. And speaking of things that got shouted, we need to talk about the sentence that did more reputational damage than almost anything else in this entire saga. During the Oprah interview, Meghan described her upbringing in a way that a great many people heard as saying she had grown up essentially as an only child. She has a father, she has a half-sister, Samantha, she has a half-brother, Thomas Jr. All three of those people are real, all three of them share her history, and all three of them were watching. Her brother's reaction to hearing it, in his own telling, was not fury. It was something colder and sadder than fury. He said he made a small mark on his board and thought, there is another one. A board. As in, he had been keeping count. I want to give the generous reading here, and I want to give it properly rather than as a token gesture before returning to the attack, because the generous reading is genuinely strong. Only child language is extremely common among people who have experienced real estrangement. It is not automatically an attempt to erase anybody. People raised primarily by one parent, people who have had almost no contact with half-siblings across their entire adult lives, people whose family structure on paper bears very little relationship to the family structure they actually lived inside, will describe themselves that way and mean it sincerely. They are not producing a genealogical statement. They are describing an emotional interior, and the emotional interior of a fragmented childhood frequently is one of aloneness, regardless of how many names appear on the family tree. If she experienced her upbringing that way, then saying so on television is not a lie. It is a description of a felt reality, and demanding technical accuracy about a painful childhood from someone sitting under studio lights is not a reasonable standard. That is the honest defense, and I think it is largely correct. But whether that is what was happening, or whether it was a piece of deliberate narrative simplification, taking a complicated backstory with inconvenient people in it and smoothing it down into something cleaner and more sympathetic for an audience of millions, is genuinely impossible to determine from the outside. Both readings fit the available evidence exactly. Anyone who tells you they know for certain which one it was is telling you about themselves rather than about her. What is not in doubt is the effect it had. It landed badly with a large number of people who had no particular investment in defending Thomas Markle, and it hardened something that might otherwise have softened. So let us talk about the two people watching that broadcast, because their credibility is a genuine problem for this story, and I am not going to smuggle it past you. Samantha, the half-sister, has been consistently and loudly critical for years. Her core argument is the one we have already examined. Without their father's investment, none of the rest of it happens. Thomas Jr., the half-brother, has made similar arguments with sharper personal edges and has just given what is being reported as the most brutal interview he has ever given on the subject. Both of them have complicated personal histories. Both of them have possible incentives: financial, reputational, or simply the very human incentive of being publicly aggrieved and finally having an audience for it. People who talk to cameras about their famous relatives are not neutral witnesses, and pretending otherwise would be an insult to your intelligence. None of that automatically makes them wrong. Interested witnesses can still be accurate witnesses. Courts hear from interested witnesses every single day and manage to sort truth from grievance without throwing out the testimony on principle. But it does mean their accounts arrive with weight attached, and you should hold them accordingly. Here is the thing that keeps me from dismissing all of it, though, and I want to be precise about the logic rather than hand-waving. You have three separate people: her father, her half-sister, her half-brother. All three knew her before any of this became a global story. All three have described, independently over a period of years, a broadly similar pattern regarding distance and priorities. Now, they are not fully independent. They talk to each other, they share a grievance, and probably a group chat. Three voices from inside one aggrieved family is not three separate confirmations, and I am not going to pretend it is. But it is also not nothing, and the honest position is somewhere uncomfortable in the middle. It is weaker than three independent sources. It is considerably stronger than one bitter man with a grudge. Now, the timing. This is where I keep my promise from the beginning, and this is the part I actually think matters more than everything else we have discussed. Go back to the hospital. According to Thomas Markle's account, he was in a serious medical situation in a foreign country, and what he received from his daughter was a note, not a visit, not a call. Not any form of direct real-time contact between two people. A written message arriving several days after the hospitalization had begun, and, by his account, after media attention around his situation had already started building, after the reporter was already there. And during that same general period, by the reporting, Meghan was filming lifestyle content: warmth, comfort, domestic joy, the entire visual grammar of a home that runs on care. Two realities running at the same time, one of them documented in high resolution and published for an audience, the other one addressed, eventually, by a note that arrived after the press did. Here is my actual position, and it is the contrarian one I flagged at the top, and I suspect it will irritate people on both sides of this. The silence is not the damning part. I have said it 3 times now, and I will keep saying it. Silence toward a parent can be earned. He talked to tabloids. He arranged photographs. She has every right to a wall, and a wall would be honest. But she did not build a wall. That is precisely what makes this different. Because a note is not silence. A note is a response. A note is a decision to engage. And once you have decided to engage, the timing of your engagement becomes a legitimate subject of scrutiny in a way that pure silence never would be. If she had said nothing at all, ever, through every heart attack and the stroke and the amputation, that would be a hard, cold, coherent position, and honestly, I would have less to say about it. Brutal, but consistent. You cannot accuse a wall of hypocrisy. What is much harder to explain is a response that arrives days late and appears to track the arrival of press attention rather than the arrival of the medical emergency. That is not coldness. Coldness would be simpler. That looks, and I want to be careful because looks is exactly the right word here, like managing an optics problem rather than answering a family one. I do not know that. Nobody does. There is a completely mundane explanation available in which reaching someone quickly in a foreign hospital is genuinely difficult, in which lawyers were involved, in which the delay is logistics rather than strategy. That explanation is entirely plausible, and I want it on the record. But the sequence, reporter first, note second, is the detail that has done more to corrode public sympathy than any interview her father has ever given. And I think that is why, not because people believe she is cruel, because people suspect the response was produced for an audience rather than for a man in a bed. Which brings us to the thing that could resolve all of this and does not exist. Meghan has never publicly given her own account of why this relationship collapsed to this degree. Not properly, not in detail. And I think that fact deserves considerably more weight than it usually gets in videos like this one, because it means everything you have heard tonight, including everything I have said, is one side of a two-sided story. There may be specific incidents, specific betrayals of trust, specific patterns of behavior from her father's side going back decades that none of us have any knowledge of whatsoever, and that would meaningfully change how every single beat of this reads if we had them. That is not a rhetorical concession I am making to seem balanced. I mean it literally. If there is a reason she has never said out loud, the entire ledger I built for you earlier could be the wrong ledger, and she is not obliged to produce it. Public figures do not owe the world a forensic accounting of their worst family history. Someone who has decided to keep the reason private, particularly if the reason involves other people or a childhood she does not want litigated on television, is making a choice that a great many private individuals make every day without anyone calling it suspicious. So why does this one refuse to resolve either way? I think it comes down to three things sitting in the same frame, and it is the combination rather than any single element. The consistency of the accounts from multiple family members over an extended period with nobody credible contradicting the basic factual spine of them. The complete absence of a financial motive in a story where a financial motive would explain everything neatly if it were there. And the visible distance between a public identity built substantially on compassion and connection and a private family relationship that has stayed frozen through a heart attack, a stroke, and an amputation. Any one of those on its own is survivable. All three at once is why this story will not die. There is a broader thing here, and it is the reason I wanted to spend this long on one family that most people are frankly exhausted by. Public pressure does not fix estrangements. It never has. Every comment section on Earth could reach unanimous agreement tonight, and it would change nothing, because the only two people who hold the actual decision are the two people who are not reading the comment. Reconciliation happens when both parties are independently ready, quietly, usually with nobody watching. Watching harder does not accelerate it. If anything, an audience makes reaching out more expensive, because now the first person to move does it in public and risks doing it in front of everybody who has already decided what it means. Which is worth remembering the next time you find yourself typing something extremely satisfying underneath a story like this one. So let me close the loops I opened in order, because I promised you I would, and I am not going to leave you searching for the ending somewhere else. The hospital in the Philippines, that happened. A man in his 80s lost part of a leg, and by his own account, there was no visit and no call, and the letter arrived after the reporter. That is his version. It has not been credibly contradicted, and it is the single hardest fact in this entire story to look at directly. The phone number. 15 years unchanged. I told you it was the whole story in one line, and here is why. It is not a wall. It is an open channel that does not get answered, which means the decision not to answer is not a policy set once in the week of the wedding and left to run. It is a decision that gets made again every morning by somebody and has been made again every morning through every emergency since. Diplomats understand exactly what an unanswered open line means, and it is not indifference. Indifference cuts the line. This is something else. And the thing I said would annoy half of you. The silence is not the damning part. Silence can be earned, and by talking to tabloids and staging photographs, he went a long way toward earning it. If she had simply never responded to any of it, ever, I would have far less to say. The damning part is the note that arrived after the press did, sitting in the same window as filmed content about warmth and home. Not because a note is cruel, because a note that tracks press attention rather than a medical emergency looks like it was written for the people outside the hospital rather than the man inside it. That is the accusation. It is narrower than the one people usually make, and it is much harder to answer. Where does it actually leave things? Genuinely unresolved, and I am not going to manufacture an ending for you that does not exist. Thomas Markle has said clearly and repeatedly, and most recently, that he would still take the call. After everything. After the years, after the interviews, after his own considerable contribution to the wall between them, he says the line stays open and he would pick it up. Whether that call ever comes is the only part of this story that has not been written yet. And here is the thing I keep landing on, and then I will let you go. He was the first person to hold her. That is his account of the delivery room, and it is the least remarkable sentence any father has ever said. Now, there is a number in a phone that has not changed in 15 years, and a man in his 80s running out of leg and heart and time, and 2 grandchildren he has never been in a room with. Somewhere, that phone still works. Now, I want to hear from you, and I mean this genuinely rather than as a prompt for engagement. Does the privacy contradiction we walk through actually change how you read the compassion at the center of the Sussex brand? Or do you think an estrangement this old and this tangled is simply not fair game for outsiders who have never heard her side of it? And separately, is there still a realistic path back here? Or has too much time and too much public conflict already passed for that door to be open at all? Tell me honestly, I read them.